According to the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, alcohol contributes to approximately 18.5% of emergency department visits and 22.1% of overdose deaths related to prescription opioids. An estimated 95,000 people, 68,000 men, and 27,000 women die from alcohol-related causes annually, making it the third leading preventable cause of death in the United States. On November 14th, 2013, Larry Roberts found himself at a crossroads in his life. He was lying on his couch, recovering from a 2-week bender and watching a tragic scene in one of his favorite movies. And it was at that point something spoke to him and said, if you don't get help, tomorrow will not happen. It was at that point that Roberts reached out to a close friend and said, if I don't get help, I'm going to die. Roberts has quite the redemption story to tell, and podcasting has now provided him a solace and a clear direction in his life. He's now on a mission to use podcasting as a positive tool for change and helping others create a podcast with a passion, purpose, and a plan. Roberts joined me this week to have a conversation about his redemption story and how he's using podcasting as a positive tool for conversation, change, and impact. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about your expertise in podcasting and a little bit about your personal life journey as well. Great to see you this afternoon, and thank you so very much for being here.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Once again, this is a great opportunity to come together and talk shop. I always enjoy talking podcasting, so I'm here, man. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, as am I, buddy, and I want to start a conversation about digging into an important date in your life, because I know back in 2013 and mid-November you sort of had a meeting with yourself that had changed your life. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about it.
Yeah, it was. Man, you did your research. Good job there. So yeah, it was November 14th of 2013, and I found myself sitting on the couch, and I had reached a point of alcoholism that I had to make the decision of either go to rehab or the next day probably wasn't going to show up. So I had been on a very, very, very lengthy bender, and all I was consuming at the time was basically alcohol and some breakfast shakes, and that's not a good combination. And while, I was sitting there on the couch that last day, somehow I had a moment of clarity, and I had a realization that if I didn't get help immediately and reach out to a friend of mine, that I just wasn't going to see the next day. So it was almost like I was in a slow motion form of suicide. It was a very, very dark experience, but I'm thankful that I was able to reach out. I did get help. I did go into rehab. I was in there for 7 weeks. came out on the other side sober, and I've been sober ever since. So while it was a very difficult period, it was a very educational period. You know, I saw a lot of what not to do with your life and how not to react when things don't necessarily go your way. Because I mean, that's why I started drinking in the first place. I had I had some dreams that I was chasing, and I had a realization back in 2000 that it wasn't going to happen, and I felt completely lost. And that's when I started taking up the bottle. So over the next 13 years, you know, I drove myself to that point of making the decision to get help or check out. So here I am today on the other side, thankfully.
Well, Larry, I'm glad that you sort of have found the other side, my friend, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on the concept of both perseverance and overcoming obstacles. So what does it mean to you to persevere, and the meaning of resilience as well? I'm curious to get your answers there.
Yeah, I mean, perseverance can be defined by in a variety of different ways, and of course, it means different things to different people. But overall, it's really just the self-discipline and the determination to carry on, to keep moving, regardless of what life hits you with, or whatever situation you find yourself in that becomes difficult. You know, it's very, very easy once we hit difficult times to just check out and just go, I'm not going to do that. Maybe I'll do something else, or I wasn't meant to do this, or I wasn't meant to do that. But perseverance is looking at those obstacles and looking at those challenges head on and being determined to continue to carry on, continue to strive for whatever goal it is you're trying to achieve, and continue to make something out of a very, very challenging situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I know, Larry, you're a keynote speaker, you're a course creator, and you're a podcaster that has had an influence on over 51 countries and 1,500 students. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the person you are today and the good work that you do. I'm fascinated.
Yeah, I mean, the person that I am today literally is the person that came out of rehab. And, you know, when I came out of rehab, I was broken. I was severely broken. I had done so much damage to my body, nerve damage, and just I'd become obese, and I ended up walking with a cane for about a year and a half. So that was a challenge in and of itself. But throughout that time, I stumbled into podcasting, and podcasting kind of gave me a direction. It gave me an outlet. It gave me an opportunity to be creative. And then it also gave me an opportunity to reestablish myself because, you know, I was with a company and I just recently left that company January 4th of last year, but I was with that company for 21 years. And they stuck with me through all of my challenges. They stuck with me through rehab. They supported me through all my sobriety efforts. They were there for me. And it was an amazing company, an amazing family, an amazing support system. But at the same time, I had kind of damaged my brand, you know, as an individual, my personal brand. So although they were with me, I wasn't ever going to progress. I wasn't ever going to move any further up that corporate ladder. Now, I had a very good position within the company. I was a salaried employee, and I was actually a business intelligence analyst, which is just a real sophisticated way of saying that I looked at data all day. So not a lot of fun, but it paid the bills. But again, at the same time, while the company was there for me, I wasn't going to move forward at all. So I had to find a way to continue to grow as an individual and to continue to grow as a professional. And I started seeing that opportunity present itself in podcasting. So I started my first show. It was a comedy podcast. We did some tremendous things with that show. My co-host now from the show launched a very successful professional comedian career. He has a residency in Las Vegas, opening for Eddie Griffin, who is a top-tier comedian himself. And all of that came from that podcast. So I started realizing that, you know, you could do something with a podcast. And I started digging more and more into the industry. And some of my professional background, when I started with that same company, I was a corporate trainer. So facilitating and teaching and guiding others was really the root of my professional existence. So when I saw podcasting had these opportunities, I wanted to start sharing that with other people, letting other people know, hey, you can do whatever you want to do, and a podcast can help you do it. So as I continued to do that and as I continued to learn, I started speaking on virtual stages. There were these small virtual events that were going on that I would go on and do presentations, and I'd have a slide deck and I'd go through and I'd talk about various aspects of podcasting. And those virtual events, they eventually led to in-person events on small stages. And then those stages continued to grow and grow and grow. And now today, I mentioned it at the start of the show, that I'm on contract with Podfest, and I'm one of the keynote speakers there at Podfest. So it's been an amazing journey for me personally, but it's also very, very fulfilling because I get to watch others grow as well, and all through the power of podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Larry, I'll share just a little bit about why I wanted to start this podcast. So, 2.5 years ago, I was about to start a job, my friend, and my contract got suspended because of COVID. So I had a chance to sort of reinvent myself because I originally went to school to become a sports reporter. So when I started the podcast, I wanted to have a vehicle and a platform to move the needle of progress forward. And as we're recording this, buddy, we're 3 episodes shy of 600 podcasts. And I started the podcast in May of 2020. And I know that you have extensive experience in podcasting. So I'm fascinated to ask you, what do you think are the keys to a sustainable podcast?
The primary key, and I see that you're very, very good at this, the primary key is consistency. Consistency in content creation, consistency in posting, consistency in being there for your audience. Once you start a podcast and once you start to get an audience, they start to expect that content on a regular basis. And if they go to get that content and you're not presenting it, they tend to fall off pretty quick. So in my personal opinion, consistency is king.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Larry, one of the other reasons that I wanted to start this podcast was I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen to walk normally. In fact, just before I started this podcast, I just got back from physiotherapy, actually. But I wanted to start this podcast because, it's a way for me to build social capital and connections with people. And I know that having authentic conversations is a big part of having a successful podcast and making those authentic connections. Would you agree with that?
Totally. And I got to tell you, it's interesting that you kind of bring that up because I had kind of gotten in a rut with my own podcast. I have a podcast called You're the Boss, and I interview entrepreneurs. And I'd gotten into this rut of just having people on the show. And I was using placement agencies to find my guests. So these agencies would reach out and say, hey, we've got these guests. Would you like to have them on your podcast? And I would say yes, because that kind of streamlined my workflow. Podcasting, there's a lot of work involved in podcasting, and sometimes you can get distracted in various aspects of the game. But I felt that if they were giving me these guests, that kind of took out the research part on my part. So it was going to save me a lot of time. But what I ended up finding out was that these people that were coming on the show, some of them were super, super cool. They were all super nice people. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody that was on the show, but it started feeling like they were just coming on the show to pitch their book, or to pitch their business, or to pitch their latest product offering. And it started feeling like I was being an infomercial more so than making genuine connections with my guests. And as you alluded to, that's one of the most powerful things about podcasting are the connections that you can make. The vast majority of my closest friends today all came from podcasting. And at one point, they were all on my show. And now we travel the country together. We hang out together. We go to dinner together. We grow together. We work together. We do all these things together. And it all came from being on each other's shows. So that demonstrates the fact that there can be tremendous connection opportunities in a podcast, but you have to be smart about the way you do it. There's no shortcuts. And I had to learn that myself.
It's a labor of love or insanity, isn't it?
Yes, it is 100%.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that you consider me your latest podcasting friend, I'm sure.
I love it, man. I appreciate every connection that I make in podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that congratulations is in order, my friend, because you were recently named Podcast Magazine's top 40 over 40. So congratulations on the honor. And I'm just curious, what does the honor mean to you, my friend?
I mean, it means that the hard work is paying off. I mean, it's. I'm not real a big fan of being over 40. I always enjoyed being under 40. Things just felt a little bit smoother in the joints. You know what I mean? But no, it's just amazing to be given that honor. And again, it shows that the hard work is paying off because, January 4th of last year, I left that corporate position to do content creation and podcasting full time. And during that time, I've been on the road a lot, especially this year. Been traveling and attending podcast conferences and podcast meetups and anything podcasting involved, branding meetups, that sort of thing, talking about the power of podcasting. And while it's a ton of work, again, being honored with that title, being one of the 40 over 40 in podcasting, just demonstrated to me that it works. If you put in the work, it eventually starts paying off.
Yeah, there's value in both consistency and commitment, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a ton of power in just showing up. And that's one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate this year. And if you go to my Instagram, I've actually got a reel on there somewhere that talks about the power of just showing up. And people tell me all the time, dude, you're everywhere. Everywhere we look, you're in Colorado or you're in California or you are in New Jersey or you're in Florida or you're in Dallas. Since I live in Dallas here, I'm here quite a bit. But you're all over the place. And it's just because I show up. And just by showing up, it demonstrates that there's so much power in just being there, just being involved, just networking. We talked about the social credit of networking just a little while ago. There is tremendous growth opportunities in simply showing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you're the editor-in-chief of PodFest Messenger, which is one of the largest podcast newsletters that we have, buddy. So tell me about the venture and what it's all about.
Yeah, the Messenger is geared towards the independent creator. And that's one of the things that I really love about PodFest. Podcasting, it still has an indie feel to it or an independent feel to it. There's still opportunities for literally anyone to start a podcast and grow it exponentially. But there's very few resources out there, especially now because podcasting is becoming more corporate. It's not there yet, but it's quickly headed that direction. That we saw at PodFest an opening and a need that needed to be fulfilled for independent creators. So we started the PodFest Messenger. I believe it was September of last year. So we're just barely a year old now. And we've put a lot of effort into making sure that all of the content in the Messenger is helpful for the independent creator. The articles that are in the Messenger are geared towards the independent creator. There's tips and techniques on how to grow your show, how to monetize your show, how to find guests, how to write show, literally anything that has to do with podcasting. That's what we try to feature in the Messenger. And one of the things that we do that I haven't seen done in any other newsletter, at least industry newsletter, is that we also feature people that are in the PodFest community. PodFest has been around for going on 9 years now, and they've grown a very, very strong following. So what we like to do is those that are in the community or a part of the PodFest community, we like to feature them. So every issue of the newsletter has at least 2 people that are featured in the newsletter. We highlight their podcast. We highlight their accomplishments with their podcast, whether it's their pod-iversary, maybe their anniversary for their podcast, or maybe they've reached a 600 episode milestone. We love to highlight those things for the community. So it's really community focused and community based. And our goal, once again, is to provide value for the independent creator.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing like building community, isn't there?
100%. And that's one of the reasons that I just fell in love with PodFest. I didn't even go to PodFest until 2020. That was the first event that I ever went to live. And then, of course, COVID hits, right? Well, back in 2020, was it when did COVID hit? 20, yeah, it was 20.
2020, yeah.
It was 2020. So it was March of 2020, and we were in, I believe it was Orlando, Florida, and we started hearing news of this COVID stuff and lockdowns starting to come into place and flights being canceled. And I was literally in Orlando, and I flew out that Sunday, and then everything started coming to a halt on that Monday. So I got back home just in time for all the nonsense to start. But the cool thing there is again, I went to Podfest in 2020, and it just felt so welcoming and so open. And there was probably 15 to 1,600 people in attendance there in 2020, and everybody there was super supportive and super nice, and they just made you feel like you were part of something. And that type of community and that level of involvement and that level of openness is really what tied me in to the Podfest community.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Larry, now doing this a podcast for over almost 600 shows. One of the things that I try to be is always engaging and interested in the guests that I bring on to my podcast, because in my opinion, there's nothing worse than being sort of a podcasting robot when you just stick to a list of questions and you sort of just get through the list and hope you sound non-robotic, right? So what's the key, in your opinion, to being an engaging, consistent, and committed podcaster?
I think you have to be curious. I think you have to be genuinely interested in whoever you're having on your show, or you have to be curious and able to carry on a solo conversation. A lot of times we think about podcasting, we just instantly think that it's an interview show, but there's also solo podcasts out there as well. But I think if we dig into it, curiosity is really at the root of any successful show. You're either curious about the topic that you're talking about, or you're curious about the guest that you're having, and you're open to asking those questions that kind of dig into it a little bit, and you're able to have just a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Larry, in case you didn't know, we just surpassed a couple of months ago. October is actually National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And one of the reasons that I wanted to start this podcast, too, is I have a background in helping folks with disabilities find and maintain employment. And, I think podcasting is a great way for folks with disabilities to build social capital and to get noticed in every aspect of your life. So I'm curious to ask you about the positive benefits of both notoriety and the doors that can open by starting a podcast.
There's tremendous opportunity. And I think that's one of the things that folks don't realize. And sometimes new podcasters are scared to reach out to potential guests. And, because of my podcast, even though it wasn't a big podcast, it was nothing when it first started. Not saying it's a big podcast now, but it's very intimidating when you start. But I found that throughout my podcasting journey, that just asking opens tremendous doors. Even with my podcast, man, I had the opportunity to interview FBI special agents, NFL Hall of Famers, actors. I'm a huge fan of the band Pink Floyd, and I had the opportunity to interview their saxophone player, which never would have happened. None of those ever would have happened had I not had a podcast. So it opens infinite doors, and it just expands your opportunities to reach out and connect with people that you wouldn't be able to connect with any other way.
Yeah, and one of the greatest benefits of podcasting is embracing the diversity of perspective. Because I was on another podcast as a guest on Wednesday, and I said one of the reasons I wanted to start my own podcast was to really enlighten myself with different perspectives on the issues. So, as a podcaster, I just want you to build on the notion of embracing diversity of perspective and how important that is.
I mean, it's critically important. And I think we saw that there was an event back in August where it was a podcasting event. And there was a conflict of various interests between several attendees and a sponsor at the event. And it caused literally a national uproar. It was very interesting to watch it develop and see some of the reactions that came from that event and see how certain individuals were painting it in a light where there wasn't diversity being addressed and there wasn't diversity being allowed, but on the opposite side there it was an opportunity to almost cancel out diversity. So it turned into a big uproar where I think if we just look back at how we conduct ourselves on a regular basis, we need to be able to be open-minded and have conversations that are free and open amongst all races and genders and identities, and everybody has a voice and they should be able to express that, and we should be open to at least being curious enough, going back to my curiosity, be curious enough to have an understanding of the various perspectives and the various cultures and lifestyles that are out there. And I don't know of another venue right now other than podcasting that gives you the opportunity to present that. And, there's podcasts out there that have viewpoints that I definitely don't agree with and I don't want anything to do with, but they still have that opportunity to voice that. They still have a platform for them to speak on and share their views. I think we need that. I think it's absolutely critical. And I think as podcasters or even just content creators in general, we have to have that open-mindedness. We have to embrace that diversity, and we have to have an understanding that our way isn't the only way and our stance isn't the only stance. And the thing there is we have to be able to have those conversations and still have an understanding that at the bottom, we're all still human beings. We're all still individuals. We all still have the same single desire, and that's to be wanted and be loved and be accepted. And regardless of our stance or our platforms or what we have going on, that's what we are all here to do. We all have to be together. We all have to come together. We all have to support each other. Don't have to necessarily agree with each other, but we have to be open-minded enough to let creators create and embrace the fact that we are all creators at heart, and we're all human beings when we all boil it down. So diversity is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and to that point, Larry, I'm also curious to ask you about what do you think makes great content, not only for our podcast, but in general. What do you think are the keys to a great content creator?
Creativity is definitely up there. Curiosity, I'll go back to that. But really authenticity, and we hear this word so much. I hate to even use it sometimes because, just be authentic in your content and people will resonate with it. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not necessarily true. But I think it's a combination of all. We need to be curious. We need to be creative. We need to be authentic. We need to be relatable. And one of the big things too, because being a successful, quote unquote, successful content creator is really, that definition's in the eye of the creator themselves. What do you consider success with your content? Do you consider finding your audience to be success? Do you consider Joe Rogan type numbers and downloads to be success? What is success to you? With a podcast, it can serve a variety of purposes. You could be doing it for fun. And if you're having a good time, guess what? That's success. You can have a comedy podcast. You make somebody laugh. Guess what? That's success. Are you doing it for a business? Is it growing your business? Are you gaining clients from that podcast? Guess what? It's a success. So success is really defined by your individual goals as a creator. But if you look at the creativity, the curiosity, and the authenticity, I think those three key components will make you a success, whatever your definition of that word is.
Yeah, I always say that everyone's portrait of success is different, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Absolutely. But Larry, I'm also fascinated to ask you, we're coming up at the end of this year, and so I'm always cognizant for myself personally to celebrate the wins in life, no matter how big or how small. So when you look at the totality of the year, I'm curious, what are you most grateful for as we come up on the end of the year?
I'm grateful for the support system from my wife. First and foremost, if it wasn't for her, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing. She fully supported me leaving my 21-year career at the company that I had mentioned before, where she still works. I actually met her there at that office, and she still works there today. I think she surpassed me. I think this is her 22nd year. So very thankful for her continued support. Very thankful for the Podfest community and Chris Kremitzos, who is the founder and CEO of Podfest, for being my friend and letting me be involved at the level that I'm at. He's been an amazing guide and coach, and helped me find my footing in this interesting space that we're in today. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. Eric Cabral, another great friend of mine who also has supported me throughout all of this. I'm very grateful for him. And I mean, I can sit here and just name after name after name, but I'm grateful for everybody in the community that has helped me find the level of success that I found so far in this amazing game we call podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Laura, my final question for you is the one, and all of my podcasts and conversations with the people that I'm fortunate to talk to, and that's when you look at your personal and professional legacy, how do you want that to be defined?
I think we kind of hit it earlier with perseverance. How do you want it to be defined? I want perseverance to be my legacy. We didn't get into a whole lot of the personal side of things, but life has been a challenge since the day I was born. I was born with a birth defect where I should have died by the age of 4, but I had reconstructive surgery on my chest, which allowed me to continue to grow. My chest was my bone structure, my sternum was growing in while my lungs and all my organs were growing out. So I was essentially being crushed by my own body. And without this life-changing surgery, I wouldn't have made it to see age 5. So since day one, perseverance has always been at the forefront of my life. And that's what I want others to take away when they see not just the challenges that I was hit with life, but also some of the stupid decisions and horrible messes that I put myself in by making these bad decisions, but then having the perseverance to find a way out and find a way back. And here I am at 50 years old. Good Lord, nobody expected me to hit 50. I can promise you that. Here I am at 50 years old, a successful entrepreneur, and I owe it all to perseverance. So I want that to be my legacy.
Well, absolutely. And Larry, I have to tell you, you don't look a day over 30, my friend.
It's beard dye. It's just for men gel. It's just for men gel and fake teeth. They're tremendous.
Okay. Just before I let you go, buddy, I'm curious to know about the background behind you, because it's pretty cool. Is there a specific story about your background behind you, buddy?
This background was actually an accident. It was I had plans for an entirely different background, but it required to be built out with some wood, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I'm just going to slap this background up in between times. And then my wife, she put everything behind me together as far as the pillars that are back there and the lights. She did it all. So she's like, here, how about you use this? And this will be good to tide you over until you get that built out. And it looks so good that I'm just like, okay, I'll just keep it. So I owe it all to my wife. She did a tremendous job. She's got me the little T-Rex back here. And of course, the red hat is my brand. So I got my little T-Rex skull. He's wearing my red hat. I got my clock over here. And here, this is kind of cool. My friends got me this for my 50th birthday, and it's a Larry bobblehead. How cool is that?
That's fantastic. Absolutely.
Got the red hat and the microphone. So the 4 of my very, very close friends got me this that are in the podcast space as well. They got it for me for my 50th this year. And I mean, it's just tremendous. Got the hoodie on and everything, because I'm always wearing hoodies and I always wear the red hat. So, it's mostly the wife, but a lot of my friends contributed as well.
Well, I tell you, we would be lost as men without women, right? No,
100%, sir.
Absolutely. Well, Larry, tell me, if people want to get connected with you, buddy, what's the best way they can do that?
Probably easiest way is just to hit me up on Instagram. It's the Larry Roberts over on IG. Hit me up, follow me over there, drop me a DM, and I'm more than happy to help you any way that I can. Once again, the Larry Roberts on Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, Larry, I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation about podcasting, a little bit about your personal journey and life perseverance, my friend. Your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated. I want to thank you for being here this afternoon and for being added to my network today, buddy. It's most appreciated.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun talking to you.